Yo, what up, what up, what up? Welcome to another episode of the Celtics Chronicle and the Taylor Talk Celtics podcast. I'm your boy, Adam Taylor. As usual, I'm joined by my boy, my homie, compadre, co-host in crime, Mr. Billy Calabrese. What's poppin', Billy?
What's up, everybody?
And we've got a special guest today. I'd call him a super expert, an NBA draft expert, Garrett Johnson, come to just kind of give us a draft preview of potential options for the Celtics in the draft, who might fit, how they would fit, and who's realistic versus unrealistic. Garrett, man, thank you for just giving us the time, dude.
Yeah, thank you. That was super flattering. I'm very excited to talk with you guys for the first time.
Yeah, I love the networking aspect of podcasting more than pretty much anything else. I think you can make some really cool connections doing stuff like this. I'm going to jump in because people don't want to hear us basically hug each other for the next 30 minutes. So Celtics are at 28 and 32 in the draft. 28 will be on Wednesday, 32 will be on Thursday because the draft is now split over 2 days. There's a lot of positions where you could say the Celtics need depth more than anything. And one of the kind of qualifiers that I'm entering the postseason with is Brad Stevens is probably going to look at guys that have done 2, 3, 4 years in college because that's just been his MO when picking late in the draft, outside of just flipping those picks down and kicking the can down the road. So I was just wondering if we could start off with like 28. And obviously, these guys are all going to be in the same range. Who would you see as one of like the best can't miss prospects for the Celtics?
Yeah, so I think we talked a little bit before the podcast about what the needs are for the Celtics coming in. And, obviously the Drew trade happening yesterday
Yeah.
quickly makes you start rethinking and saying who could possibly be on the move next and what are the obvious points of need after that. And if we might be seeing Horford consider retirement, if we're seeing Porzingis potentially being shopped to other teams, I think the big man position is immediately where you look. And I think one guy that we could talk about here is Maxime Raynaud out of Stanford. He's kind of mocked in this range. ESPN has him in the 20s right now. A 4-year player, like we were talking about, from Stanford. And he's always been considered kind of a project when he was in college. He's 7'1", very big frame, moves like someone 4 inches shorter. But when he first got to college, he was kind of deer in the headlights. Didn't really have like the feel or the rhythm for being a roller. The pick and roll at Stanford's pretty complex, and he wasn't getting it at first. But by the time he's gotten to his senior year, he's like a completely changed player. First of all, he's added a pick and pop element to his game that seems to be dependable. He shot 35% from three this year. Good underlying statistics there. And on top of that, he's just really developed in his feel as a roller, where now he's pretty dependable with a strong point guard to be in the right spots, to fill the lane well. And I think he's a good presence inside as a scorer as well. And he's not a guy who needs heavy usage to succeed in his role. So I think he would slide very easily into a Celtic system with more vets. And being an older player, maybe he'd be able to play a bit more year one than some of the other bigs that we'll talk about.
What's his short roll game like? I noticed that. I know obviously he said he's got good feel as a roll man. The Celtics generally like their bigs to be able to play make out of that short roll at least a little bit. We've seen everyone pretty much outside of Neemias Quater be tasked with doing that. And obviously, I'm looking at his stats now 1.7 assists per game. Don't jump off the board as playmaking big, but there's always upside for a roll man to be able to just make that next pass away or that skip pass to an open corner. Have you seen much of that with him at Stanford? Is that part of his game or something he'd need to add?
I would say Stanford has had a very complex offense, so he's seen a lot of different looks. He has seen the short roll, but I would think that it's going to feel, if you watch him as a rookie, like a big step down in terms of short roll feel from who the Celtics have had. Of course, the Celtics have had an embarrassment of riches there, so it's going to feel like a step down when you've got a rookie regardless. But I do think that's going to be an area of growth for him for sure. So that could be a sticking point for the Celtics maybe when they're thinking about who to take here.
How does he compare to the big from Creighton? Everybody always wants him because him and Baylor Shireman played together. So I was kind of wondering if you can kind of compare those two and if that's even a possibility for us.
Yeah, I think Ryan Kalkbrenner is in the same range here. He is a little bit skinnier. That's the main thing that people stick on when they talk about Ryan Kalkbrenner is he's another 7-footer, but has a much skinnier frame, has all 4 years. That's been the discussion, and yet he hasn't added a whole lot of weight. But when you're talking about a guy who has great feel both as a pick and roll roller, in his case, more of a traditional roller, he can pop, but he's not really going to take more than 1 3 a game at most. Uh, but he's got fantastic feel as a roller. Has played with some of the best point guards in the country in college, and always excelled in that 2-man game. And he's also an excellent rim protector in terms of shot blocking feel, and really being able to get to a high point of contention on shots. So to me, he would be another great option. There is some question of like, can he slide into a starting role at any point with his frame? Will the NBA be able to unlock more strength for him than maybe Creighton was able to? I think that's going to be something that we're going to be talking about for the next few years with whatever team he's selected by.
So if we're just comparing these two guys, and I know this is unfair, especially when both of them bring different aspects of the skill set to the game. But if we're just looking at them on a side by side, Raynaud, is it Raynaud or Raynaud?
Raynaud, yeah.
Raynaud would bring you some more perimeter-based game. He'd give you a bigger body, so he'd be able to deal with the physicality in the NBA a little more. What's their defense like, right? Because obviously, if you're going to earn minutes on this Celtics roster, and I don't know, I'm saying this right now, sounding like a hypocrite after they just traded for Anthony Simon, but Joe Mazzulla's not going to give you minutes unless you're at least passable defensively. And I feel like that's always such a high bar for a rookie at the best of times. Which one of these two is going to give you at least viable drop defense in terms of NBA level?
I think both. In the case of Kalkbrenner, it's going to be more about the natural rim protection. So the further you go into the rim, the better Kalkbrenner is going to be, and the further you are out on the perimeter, Raynaud starts to get that advantage. I think Raynaud moves better in space, but both are capable. I think with Kalkbrenner, he's a true drop big where he isn't going to want to stay out on the perimeter too long. But Raynaud can maybe move around a little bit better with some forwards, maybe can be slightly switchable. So to me, he's maybe the more versatile guy, and Kalkbrenner has the more like blue chip skill.
That makes sense. I think that primarily the Celtics are going to switch 1 through 4 with 5 in drop anyway. They will ask bigs to probably play at the level or just behind the level of the screen and then either show or hedge. Raynaud sounds like he could deal with that, especially as long as he can recover quite quickly. Whereas Kalkbrenner, you'd probably want just permanently in drop. Is that kind of where we're at with that?
I think absolutely, yeah.
And then is there any other bigs that we're kind of missing on this discussion that would be logical, or somebody we need to be like, yo, they're not falling that far, so let's get that out of the way straight away?
Yeah, I think Joan Behringer is a guy who I've changed my mind on the most this cycle from the beginning of the year to now, where he's a younger rim running big. I think he's 19. He's from France. He's been playing in the German league. Early in the year, I think he's had the most over the year improvement of any player in this entire draft class, where early in the year, he was just rolling to the rim on impulse, didn't really have a whole lot of rhythm with his offense in terms of knowing how to like play with his point guards, play with on-ball initiators, and was just kind of rolling back and forth on a repeat, but has really come into his own late in the year and looks more like that NBA rim running big that every team craves because he's very highly athletic at 6'11". I do think that though he is 19, and like I said, this year has been a process for him. Going to the NBA will be an additional new process for him, more so than some of the seniors that we just talked about. And I also think that he might be a guy who's seen as a much more high upside pick for NBA teams, so he might not make it here at 28. But if he's there, I think the Celtics have to heavily consider it, even if he isn't traditionally who gets the type of player that gets heavy minutes in year one for a team like the Celtics. He would be a really good investment bet, I think, for the team.
See, I'm pretty high on him, and I'm wondering, would he be a candidate to stash, or is he determined to come over to the NBA like next year?
If I was in his camp, I would be determined. It's really hard to say sometimes when we don't have word from the agent specifically, but I would be strongly surprised if he didn't come over right away. To me, he doesn't have anything left to prove in Germany and just needs to get over to the NBA and get used to the NBA style of play.
We're talking a year in the G League, and we're talking a year with like the main Celtics here, where I mean Boston in general over, and obviously we can look through the players that have kind of come through this feeder system as it's become now. They've genuinely done quite well in developing talent over the course of like a 12-month period with that G League team down in Maine. Is that the most likely option there? It's not somebody that's going to come in and give you bench depth or give you spot minutes. It's more along the lines of, hey, we're going to draft him now and we're going to have to, like, he's going to be in Maine for a year and then we'll see where we're at in 12 months' time.
I think that he's a guy who will spend a lot of time in the G League. I think most players that we're going to talk about will spend some time in the G League, but he'll probably spend more time. I do realize I said German League earlier. I meant the Adriatic League over in the Balkans. But I think that to me, he's a guy who's going to really gain the most from being with the main team as much as possible. And getting on kind of like I was talking about in the Adriatic League early in the year, he did not have good synergy with his point guard and really had to build those reps out. I think he would be a guy who really benefits from being in practice, getting reps with players, building that rhythm in the pick and roll rather than kind of like learning the ins and outs of the defense in the G League, which hasn't really been as great of a development spot for defense as it was maybe a few years ago.
Would there be an NBA comp for him?
That's a good question. I think nowadays there's not as many of those pure rim running bigs in the league that it makes comparisons a little bit more difficult than it used to be. I think like if you think of maybe what Jackson Hayes was, people hoped he would become, is kind of like what people are now hoping for Joan Behringer. I think that I have a little more faith in Joan Behringer's feel than I did Jackson Hayes coming out of school. But when you're talking about a guy who is taken in the top 10 off of his potential, to be discussing someone with that kind of potential in the late 20s is, I think, a rare opportunity if it comes across.
So we are looking at somebody that's like can't miss. You definitely want to try and pick him up. What on a scale of 1 to 10 in likelihood, what's the chance that you think is available at 28?
I would guess the chances are under 20% if I were to just kind of give that kind of. I think that at this point he's been a late riser. His late season play has been very strong. So for a guy who was kind of already in first round talks before that, to know that he's been very impressive late in the process is probably going to have someone take a shot on him before it reaches 28.
So you're getting super duper lucky.
Yeah, that would be a lucky break for them, I think.
Yeah, I'm all about the lucky breaks. I'm right there. Before we move on to, I want to look at some forwards as well and maybe some wing, mainly just because Tatum's gone down and you need depth there. But before we go on to that, I just want to make sure, is there any other bigs that we can be like, hey, this guy could be available, or anyone that kind of could be a sleeper that people might be a bit upset that they got drafted at 28, but could then end up being a bit of a riser in like first or second year?
So I don't know how to pronounce his first name, but Markovic out of the Adriatic League. It's a mouthful to say. I've been coached on how to say it, but I still don't know. But it's Markovic is his last name. He plays in the Adriatic League for Mega, which is a traditional team for prospects out of that region. He's another big man who's probably more on the stash side. So maybe at 32, he would be more talked about. More of a power forward than a center. Has shown some spacing this year and moves around the court very well. Has been highly efficient in that league for his age. He's only 19. To me, he would maybe be another guy that they consider if they're not trying to roster 2 rookies.
Would you consider with our position at 28 and 32? Because I always go best player available over need. Because I think when you draft for need, you kind of pigeonhole yourself sometimes. Would you consider bigs pretty much the best players available at our spots?
I think the players that we're talking about, that we've talked about so far, would be in that conversation. Enough so that if you are tie-breaking between 2 prospects that you really view highly, I think he'd be more than happy. I think Behringer is probably going to be one of the highest-ranked guys that we talk about. But those other bigs also are guys. Maxime Raynaud, I would personally consider to be a guy who's worthy of selection in the 20s. So if it's at 28, you'd be very happy as long as you're not passing up on a much higher talent who's also falling.
Just, I want to touch on, and I mentioned this to you at the start before we hit record. My kind of draft darling right now for the Celtics is Koby Bray, and the obvious reasons are potential to be a generational shooter in this class, high volume with high conversion. I think that if you're going to play for the Celtics and you're just going to be a specialist, especially with all the talk of Sam Hauser potentially being on the trade block, finding another guy that can come in and give you 35 to 40% off the catch is going to be highly important. Do you see Bray being available in that 28 range, or do you think that's he would have gone late lottery or early 20s?
I actually think it's much more likely that he goes in the second round.
Really?
So he's a guy whose shooting profile just breaks shooting models. I mean, his level of shooting is just incredible. He's been the best shooter in college basketball for 2 straight years. Um, Went a little bit under the radar at Dayton until last year, and then this past season when he transferred to Kentucky, really made his mark on the league. So, yeah, it's undeniable that he's this incredibly elite shooter. There's just a lot of questions about what else he does. So that's the kind of guy who typically falls to second round, where it's very clear that he's a specialist. He can do a little bit on the ball, but he's never really been asked to go downhill, for example. His handle isn't really tested very often in college. I think his defense is it's going to be that's going to probably be the swing skill for him in general, just entirely on the defensive end. Is like how much can you get out of this, because he has wingspan, he has he can move around decently for his size, but he's not going to be like a guy who wins off of athleticism. So how does he become a competent defender in a Boston Celtics system is to me the big question. Because Hauser, for example, has never had the athletic tools to be a great defender, but he's made it work with feel throughout his time in Boston. And I think Bray is going to have to show that early on. And I think teams are just kind of trying to fish for what else Bray brings to the table beyond the shooting at this point.
So otherwise, he's a single skill specialist, which generally works in the regular season, but falls to pieces in the postseason, especially once we start getting deeper into the rounds. Would you say then, and this is just like I'm just guessing here, a less bouncy version of Svi Mikhailuk? Is that kind of what you're looking at with Koby Bray?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. The shooting is just the shooting has the chance to be just so elite. So, like Mikhailuk has always been signed as a shooting specialist, but his shooting level hasn't been like so outlier that he can't be dropped off of a roster here and there when there's a roster crunch. Whereas if Brea can really be the level of shooter that he's been in college, it's going to be hard to keep him off of a roster, even if we're talking about potential playoff like sticking points with his game. So I think to me, he's somebody who will probably go in the second round, but I think if he shoots at the level he has in college, he's going to stick around a good long while.
So if the Celtics took him at 32, would that be a decent pickup for them? Or do you think that they would have still been reaching?
Well, if it's their last pick in the draft, at that point, if he's your guy, you just take him.
Yeah.
To me, I don't think there really are a whole lot of names in this year's second round that I would call reaches. I think by the time that the Celtics selected 28, there's only going to be so many of those super high-level can't-miss talents left, and by the time it gets to 32, they might be gone. It's hard to say. So once you get to that range, I'm pretty comfortable with anyone who seems like they could stay on an NBA floor.
That's fair. Billy, what you got, man?
I was just wondering, because it is the long shot, but let's say hypothetically there was a Jaylen Brown trade to the Spurs and we got the number 2 pick. What would you think of Harper? Is he really this can't miss candidate that I have in my head, that he's like a Cade and Brunson combo?
Yeah, I think it sounds like a lofty comparison, but I think it's actually pretty fair. I think that there's been some discussion on social media today about how many drafts would Dylan Harper be the number 1 pick in the last 10 years. And, there are a lot of can't miss prospects over the last 10 years. So the number is probably like 2 or 3. But when we're talking about someone going number 2 who should be considered a number 1 pick in any other draft, but just isn't discussed like that this year because Cooper Flagg is that good, it would be a huge boon for the Celtics to pick someone up like that. It would, create kind of that 2 timeline trajectory for the Celtics where they can kind of hang around in playoff appearances, maybe no longer be a contender after a Jaylen Brown trade, but it would allow them to kind of put Dylan Harper in a really healthy environment to succeed. And with the level of talent that he has, you mentioned that he's kind of got a little bit of Brunson to a little bit of Cade. It's not an oversell. He has those skills coming out of college. Whether he hits those levels is another story that we'll see. But I mean, coming out as a prospect, he's an incredible offensive talent, really deep feel for the game, and somebody that you would be so happy to build a team around.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really hyped on him, but I'm not that I want to trade Jaylen Brown, but number 2 pick in Castle, I'm listening.
That's a good question. I know we're getting off topic here now, but one of the biggest, I kept reading when the Spurs were involved in trade discussions, was one of the reasons they would potentially give up the number 2 pick in a trade for Kevin Durant, and now an argument for doing it for Jaylen Brown, is you've got the De'Aaron Fox and Stephon Castle duo, which is already a questionable fit due to the lack of scoring out, like pull-up shooting after dribble shooting. And then the concern was that you add Harper into this, and now you've got three guys with quite a considerable crossover in what they do well versus what they struggle with. Is Harper in that same kind of camp as Stephon Castle, where it's, hey, he's going to be a slasher, a rim pressure guy that's going to drive and kick, hit them spray actions, but that's kind of the mold that he's in. He's going to need to develop that off the dribble game on the perimeter or off the catch game on the perimeter.
So I think that Dylan Harper already has the skill level of the perimeter player, the guy who can create on the perimeter, get his own shots. It's more the efficiency right now that has to catch up. Whereas I think with Castle, it's kind of like starting from scratch on the perimeter, where there wasn't a whole lot to work with. He actually came into this season looking a lot more confident and smooth on the perimeter than I think anyone scouting him expected. But even then, it was still a massive work in progress for him. I think Harper is going to look much more comfortable. He's going to be much more relied upon to take those shots, even if they don't go in as much as you'd like early in their career. The good news for him is he's playing on a Spurs team that has always struggled with spacing, so it's not like there's going to be guys that you're keeping off the court who can be more of a perimeter threat than him early on. So it's not going to feel painful to play through those 3-point shots. But yeah, I think to me he's much more polished than Castle coming out of school. And honestly, to me, I think Harper is a better talent than Stephon Castle, to the point that you take Harper and figure it out over the course of the next couple of years of who sticks around out of those three. I really feel comfortable enough that he's that good of a talent that you just can't pass.
Then you give them Jaylen Brown and you take Harper. There we go. Podcast done. Moving back to the latter end of the first round or early end of the second. Excuse me. Rasheer Fleming's another name I've seen pop up, pop down. Forward, if I'm correct. Somebody that brings a little bit of athleticism, is that right? He add a bit of an explosive punch to the second unit, or again in the G League, and then potentially at the end of the bench later in the year. What can you tell us about him and how he could potentially fit?
Yeah, he's one of the guys I'm most familiar with in this entire class. I'm a big fan of his. I actually have him closer to the lottery than I think the traditional media and draft projections have him. I think draft projections have him in this range of the Celtics pick, but I'm very high on him. He is more of a power forward who can slide to the center in a smaller lineup type player. Really long. He has the athletic measurements of some of the star forwards in the NBA, and looks the part athletically when you watch him. I think the questions with him more so are that this year was kind of like the first year where he started to really come into his own. And the first 2 years in college, he wasn't really a shooter. He was on some bad St. Joseph's teams playing in the mid-major level. And the St. Joseph's team has improved quite a bit over time, and he's been a big part of that. He rebounds way above his size for a 6'9" guy. I mean, his rebounding numbers are just incredible. And he's learned how to shoot this year, and it seems legitimate. How legitimate is going to be the questions that I think that a lot of NBA teams raise, because he hadn't been a shooter the previous 2 years. Now this year, suddenly he's a multi-shot 3 a game threat, and really, I think NBA teams are also going to have questions about what he can do in terms of moving the ball around the court. Hasn't been asked to do a lot of playmaking at St. Joseph's, which is a very guard-heavy team. And he's mostly been their play finisher. If he plays power forward in the NBA, he can't just be a pure play finisher. So that's going to be a question in terms of like immediate impact and where his development can go. I think the defense is awesome, highly switchable, athletic, as we talked about, can play inside and out, which is really valuable. To me, he's exactly what NBA teams should be investing in their forward grouping of guys who are super versatile defensively, offer enough offensively that they can see the court, and then you just hope over the course of their rookie deal that they develop into what their potential holds.
I was waiting for you to go then, Billy. So with Rasheer then, is this another one of those cases where if he falls to that range, the Celtics have got super duper lucky, pick him by any means necessary, he's going to be able to give you some legitimate depth? Is he, and just to tack onto that, is he one of the few guys that if he was available at this range, which clearly there's a very high chance that he won't be. But if he was, is he one of the few guys in that range that wouldn't really need too much time in the G League?
I think he's actually a guy who would really benefit from the G League. And
Okay.
I'm actually generally someone who isn't a huge advocate these days of sending guys to the G League for extended time with the idea of them becoming like this incredible next level, taking this next step. It's really at this point more about just getting reps. But for Rasheer, I think actually it would be a really good opportunity for him to become more comfortable moving the ball around the court, kind of getting used to no longer being a pure play finisher. I think the G League would help him a lot as a rookie. But I think he would be a guy who, if he was on the main team, would have significant responsibilities early. It would probably mostly be on the defensive end and mostly sitting in the corner offensively early on. But I think you get a lot of great reps at either level. And so to me, I would say can't miss is maybe not what the consensus would say at 28. I think most people would say it's a good pick, but not a can't miss pick. For me, it would be a can't miss pick. I would be very happy with a guy like him at 28.
And my last one, I doubt he's going to get that far down, but let's just say we traded up or something happens on the draft, he falls. How would Danny Wolf fit with the Celtics?
Yeah, Danny Wolf's one of the most hotly debated prospects, I think, in this class. And to me, he's still a bit of an unknown, despite having scouted him quite a bit. He has had this role at Michigan that is just so different from what he had done in the mid-major level, even. It's kind of incredible to see a player take on a larger role and a more diverse role at a much higher level of play like Wolf has this year. It's been one of the coolest breakouts of the season. He's had a lot of ball handling reps at Michigan. He's been a rare 6'10", 6'11" player who actually initiates from the perimeter, initiates his dribble from the perimeter and attacks downhill, attacks the defense head on, and makes plays triple drive passing. And that live dribble stuff is really exciting and interesting. But there's a question of, on a team like the Celtics, of how much of it he does early on. And if he's not a frequent dribble drive rep guy in the offense, does he become more of a traditional big, and what does that look like? I think there's kind of an interesting question there of how quickly he assimilates into a really high level roster like the Celtics and what his role looks like. Because I think overall the potential is really interesting, and that's kind of been what's most debated, is how far this can go. So obviously you hear 6'11" live dribble passer and you just get really excited right away, especially when he can shoot threes. But when you watch him, you immediately start to wonder how much of it translates. And I think I'm still debating that in my head. I think he'd be a very good gamble for the Celtics at 28. I think he likely goes sooner. But yeah, he's a guy who I'm not going to be confident in my own evaluation of up until I start watching him play.
Is he one of these guys where you kind of need to alter your system to get the best out of? Talking about like how quickly he can assimilate. Will a team need to, if they wanted to get the dribble drive creation from Wolf, they'd need to tweak their own offensive system and kind of put him in some positions to really show that skill set rather than try to, for lack of a better term, smash a square peg into a round hole?
I think it depends. If your offense, if you really want to make sure that you have someone inside who's just gonna punch the ball in if they have the ball in the block, you probably need to run another big with Danny Wolf. That's what Michigan did this last year. They had a more traditional center in there with him at all times, even though he himself is a center. And I think other than that, I think in terms of like actually getting Danny Wolf incorporated into your offense, it would be best to craft a role for him within the offense and kind of adjust it to him. But I don't think it's impossible to have him be a factor without altering it too severely. Because I think a lot of the live dribble from the perimeter can be converted into slashing that he can do off the ball. I think the main thing is just because he isn't a very strong defender, let's say, the less offensive reps he gets within the offense, the more those defensive issues will start to feel louder. So you have to feel comfortable that you're going to get him enough offensive opportunity to earn his keep on the floor, I think. And that's a bigger concern than how he would fit into the scheme.
That's super fair. That's really fair. I'm going to end it here and ask for if you were Brad Stevens tomorrow and Thursday, and you've got 28 and 32, who are you taking and what are you doing with them? Are you putting them in the first, like in the main roster, or are you moving them over to the G League, or even stashing them?
Well, I think now that we kind of have the idea that the Celtics aren't done trading, that we might see that there's enough roster space for rookies to play in this rotation, which I don't think we would have said a month ago. To me, I think Raynaud would be a great pick in terms of having someone who can immediately play as a big man. I think Kalkbrenner, if you were to offer a best fit for Kalkbrenner, the Celtics would be up there. So from his point of view, he'd love to be a Celtic. For me, I think it would be a good pick, especially at like if he falls to 32, that would be wonderful. We didn't talk about Walter Clayton Jr., but I think he would be a good option for them at 28. Somebody who will probably be in that range. He might go a little earlier. And we talked about Rasheer Fleming. If he falls to you all, I better see that pick. I'd be very excited about it.
Cool.
Garrett, before we let you get out of here, is there anything you want to plug? Anything you want people to follow or check out that you're doing right now or you're working on throughout the year?
No real plugs here. You can follow me at Halfwake Takes on Twitter, but beyond that, I just share my opinion on there, and otherwise, that's all I got right now.
Now that's all you need, man. That's all you need these days. Appreciate you very much, everybody watching online. Once this goes up on Wednesday, let me know the draft picks you want to make. Let me know what targets you're hoping for, and then we can debate whether it was good or not on Friday. Once we know where these two picks turn into. As usual, follow Billy over at Letterboxd. Sign up to the Celtics Chronicle newsletter. The link's in the description. Garrett, thank you very much for your time today, buddy.
Thank you all for having me. This has been great.
Thank you, Garrett.